How many times can your spine crack under the weight of tons of industrial machinery, while the freezing water of an underwater lab rises around your neck, before you decide that the only logical thing to do is simply give up and die? This isn't just a rhetorical question about the physical durability of a superhuman in a 1966 comic book. It is a visceral inquiry into the human soul when faced with the inevitable suffering of existence. If we are brutally honest with reality, life doesn't operate as a fair reward system for good behavior. It is chaotic, indifferent, and often sadistic. It is exactly in this desolate scenario that the figure of Peter Parker emerges, not as an unreachable demigod descending from Olympus to grace us, but as a painful, sweaty, and inspiring reflection of ourselves, wearing a cheap spandex suit, which he sewed himself, to hide the panic of having to pay the overdue rent the next day. To truly understand the depth of Spider-Man's resilient philosophy and avoid the superficial traps of blockbuster movies, it is imperative to strip the character of all the recent Disney-fied layers. Forget the tech support from Iron Man or the suits filled with AI. Look at the marrow of the original concept forged by Stan Lee, and crucially, by the visual and narrative genius of Steve Ditko in the 1960s. What we have there is a cultural anomaly. Up to that historical moment, superheroes were father figures, perfect, financially stable like Bruce Wayne, or aliens blessed with divine gifts like Kal-El. They were the ultimate power fantasy. Peter Parker, on the other hand, was conceived as the fantasy of vulnerability. He is the archetype of the modern individual ground down by the gears of a demanding society, someone who received immense power but realized, in the most traumatic way possible, that power doesn't solve real problems. On the contrary, it magnifies them. The cornerstone of this philosophy lies in the correct interpretation of that sentence the whole world repeats, but which has a more complex origin than common sense suggests. With great power there must also come great responsibility. Comic book purists know that, originally in Amazing Fantasy Thriller 15, this phrase appeared in a final narrative caption box, not as direct dialogue from Uncle Ben in that specific moment. However, whether as the narrator's voice or, as retconned decades later, a piece of advice from his uncle, the weight of the phrase remains the same. Mass culture has transformed this into a cute bumper sticker mantra, but let's analyze the intrinsic brutality of this statement. It is not a glorious invitation to heroism. It is a perpetual condemnation. What this maxim establishes, in practice, is that omission is an unforgivable moral crime. If you possess the capacity to alter the outcome of a negative situation, and choose not to do so out of convenience, fear, or selfishness, you are an accomplice to the disaster. Peter Parker's guilt over Uncle Ben's death, the fact that he let the burglar escape minutes earlier out of pure pettiness, is not merely a narrative accessory or a tragic origin story. It is the engine of a perpetual neurosis that keeps him from sleeping. He doesn't act out of pure crystalline altruism, at least not at the genesis of his journey. He acts because the alternative, living with the corrosive weight of knowing he could have done something and didn't, is unbearable. This launches us directly into a raw existentialist view. Jean-Paul Sartre said we are condemned to be free, condemned to choose who we are at every instant, and that we are entirely responsible for those choices. Spider-Man is the physical incarnation of this Sartrean anguish. He knows that every second of rest could cost a life, and this awareness makes him a slave to his own morality. It is a Kantian imperative taken to the extreme. He acts out of duty, regardless of whether it brings him happiness or misery. But here enters the aspect that makes this philosophy fascinating and applicable to our own mediocre, flawed lives. Resilience in the face of the absurd. Albert Camus introduced us to the myth of Sisyphus, the guy condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. Spider-Man is the modern Sisyphus. Peter Parker's life is structurally a continuous Greek tragedy. He saves the city, but loses the girlfriend. He stops a robbery, but arrives late and loses his job at the Daily Bugle. He studies for his finals, but has to leave to stop the rhino and fails the class. The universe actively conspires against him. There is even a canonical term in the comics to describe this phenomenon: the Parker luck. It is Murphy's Law applied with cruel precision to a single individual. The philosophical beauty here lies not in the fact that he suffers. Suffering is guaranteed for all of us. It is the only biological constant besides death. The undeniable beauty lies in his response to suffering. Peter does not become a nihilistic villain, even though the universe gives him daily reasons to do so. He doesn't isolate himself. He gets up. He reloads the web cartridges he invented himself. Because yes, the real Peter Parker is a chemistry genius who creates his own tech from scraps, not a dependent of billionaires. And he cracks jokes. This incessant humor that irritates villains is not just juvenile mockery. It is a Freudian defense mechanism, a form of sublimation. He laughs in the face of the abyss so the abyss doesn't devour him. When Spidey mocks Dr. Octopus's haircut while dodging mechanical arms capable of crushing titanium, he is shrinking the terror of the situation, bringing the monster down to a human scale. He laughs to keep from screaming. It is a valuable lesson on how to face our own tragedies. If we take life too seriously all the time, the weight crushes us. Humor is the spring that allows us to absorb the impact. Digging deeper into this analysis, we need to talk about the mask. Unlike public figures like the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man needs anonymity. The mask allows him to be an idea. Anyone could be under that full-body suit that covers skin, race, and scars. When Peter puts on the mask, he stops being the nerd from Queens and becomes the manifestation of indomitable will. It is a Nietzschean concept of self-overcoming. He projects an ideal and painfully strives to fill that mold. The mask releases his id, but focused on justice. He allows himself to be brave and loud, compensating for the shyness and social constraints of his civilian identity. This leads us to a crucial point that differentiates Spider-Man from practically any other pop icon: the nature of his strength. I'm not talking about lifting buses or the spider sense. I'm talking about the classic scene from The Amazing Spider-Man number 33, Ditko and Lee's masterpiece in the Master Planner arc. Visualize the hero buried under tons of steel in a flooding laboratory, with the serum that can save Aunt May out of reach. He is exhausted, wounded, defeated. Physics says he cannot lift that. Rational logic screams for him to die. But he enters an agonizing internal monologue, revisits his failures, his promises, his guilt over his uncle, and, in a scream of purely spiritual effort, he lifts the impossible weight. That wasn't muscular strength. It was the triumph of will over matter. It is proof that the human spirit, when anchored in a purpose that transcends the ego, can achieve the impossible. Life will throw tons of metaphorical machinery on top of you. Debt, disease, divorce. The philosophy of the spider teaches that the strength to lift this weight comes not from muscles, but from the absolute refusal to accept final defeat. There is also a social and class dimension to the character that cannot be ignored. Spider-Man is the working-class hero. He isn't a playboy. He sews his torn suit because he doesn't have money for another one. He gets sick because he eats poorly and sleeps little. He sells photos of himself to a newspaper that slanders him. A cruel irony of having to feed the machine that destroys his reputation just to pay Aunt May's bills. This validates the experience of the majority of us. It is easy to be virtuous with a full bank account. True moral fiber is tested when you are desperate and have to choose between what is right and what is easy. Peter could use his powers to rob banks or be a millionaire athlete, as he briefly tried in the beginning. But he chooses dignified poverty. Seneca and Marcus Aurelius would approve. He understands that virtue is the only true good. In a world obsessed with status and appearances, Spider-Man tells us that you can be a loser socially and still be the noblest person in the room. And we cannot forget his relationship with his villains, who serve as distorted mirrors of his psyche. Dr. Octopus is arrogant intellect without a moral compass, what Peter could be if he let his genius go to his head. Venom, especially the classic Eddie Brock era, is resentment and victimhood, what Peter could be if he blamed the world for his problems. The Green Goblin is power without responsibility, pure chaos. Every fight is a kinetic philosophical debate. Peter fights against his own potential demons. He tries to save them because he knows the line between hero and villain is thin and often depends on just one bad day. Spider-Man's resilience is also marked by the acceptance of fallibility and real trauma. He fails, and his mistakes have permanent consequences. The ultimate example, and the moment that ended the Silver Age of comics, is the death of Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man 3U121. She doesn't die just because the Goblin threw her off the bridge. There is that technical detail, that little snap sound effect near her neck when the web catches her. The physics of the sudden stop, caused by Peter's attempt to save her, contributed to the tragic end. He tried to save her and failed in the worst possible way. He killed the person he loved while trying to protect her. How does one recover from that? Most wouldn't, but he transforms this overwhelming grief into an even fiercer dedication to life. He doesn't become the Punisher, killing criminals. He honors her memory by protecting life, even the lives of his enemies. It is a harsh lesson in maturity. Growing up is accumulating scars on your soul without letting them turn your skin into an insensitive shell. If we are cynical, we could call this masochism. Why go on? Why not throw the suit in the trash? The iconic scene from Spider-Man No More, Amazing Spider-Man 50, and live a normal life. Because he knows an inconvenient truth. The world is entropic. It tends toward chaos. If good people do not exert a constant counterforce, evil wins by default. The philosophy of the spider is the rejection of apathy. It is tempting to look at corruption and violence and say, there's no way. Peter doesn't have that luxury. He feels the connection to the whole. If a mugger runs past him and he does nothing, the responsibility for what that mugger does next is his. It is a mature worldview that expects no applause. In fact, Spidey is often hated or feared by the public and police, inflamed by J. Jonah Jameson. He saves people and is called a menace. He takes beatings to protect those who despise him. This destroys the idea of performative social media heroism, where we do good to get likes. Spider-Man does good in the dark, anonymously, and is punished for it. He does it because it is right. This anti-victimhood stance is fundamental. Peter has every victim card in the deck: orphan, poor, bullied, exploited, unjustly persecuted. But you never see Spider-Man using this as an excuse to be mediocre or malicious. He doesn't blame the system, even though the system is unfair. He assumes absolute ownership of his destiny. It is an unpopular message nowadays, but a powerful one. Your circumstances explain your trauma, but they do not justify your inertia. No one is coming to save you. You have to be your own hero. Now let's be frank about the cost of this. Being Spider-Man hurts, physically. He ends nights with broken ribs, bruises, limping home. This visceral reality of the suffering body is important. It isn't magic. It's flesh and bone against concrete. The philosophy here is that nothing worth having comes without sacrifice. Excellence demands pain. The culture of comfort sells us the illusion that life should be easy. Spidey is the reminder that life is a struggle. The struggle isn't an obstacle. The struggle is the path. Furthermore, the concept of the friendly neighborhood teaches us about local action. While the Avengers deal with cosmic threats, Spidey deals with the mugging on the corner, the lost child. He validates heroism in the microcosm. If you can't help your neighbor or your block, you have no moral standing to want to save the world. In the end, what defines Spider-Man's personality isn't the powers. It's the stubborn humanity of Peter Parker. He is the common man who refuses to stay down. He represents hope not as a passive feeling, but as an active verb, a muscular stubbornness to make things work by sheer force of will. He teaches us that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we react to it. We are defined by the capacity to maintain decency when everything suggests barbarism. Therefore, when we look at that red and blue blur swinging through Manhattan, we aren't just seeing a pop icon. We are seeing a survival manual for the human spirit. He tells us that you can be broken, broke, lonely, and scared, but as long as you have breath in your lungs and can make a fist to get up one more time, the story isn't over. The true victory isn't defeating the villain. It is not letting the hardness of the world harden your heart. It is continuing to believe in the good and acting for the good, even when the universe punches you in the face. This is resilience. This is responsibility. This is what it means to be Spider-Man.